Hello, I'm Catherine Flick. I'm a technology ethicist, so I thought I'd start my talk a bit like the lawyer just before me. It doesn't mean I have any specialist knowledge in AI. I have general technology knowledge. I have a computer science degree, so hopefully that counts as something. But I kind of strayed away from industry and computer science and fell back into philosophy, and then that's kind of how you end up doing computer ethics. So I'm coming here today because I think it's really important for technology developers to understand the sorts of technologies that they're developing and what the impact of those technologies have on society, and also to give some ideas about how do we actually think about this stuff, because yeah, it's nice to kind of sit down with a glass of wine and have a chat at the pub or whatever about all the potential horrible things that could go wrong with technology, and people watch, dystopian science fiction movies about robots and how they're going to take over the world and kill everyone and try to be human and all this sort of difficult conceptual philosophical stuff that we don't really have any answers to. I'm not going to give you any of the answers today either, because I don't have them, and I don't think a lot of philosophers have them either. They have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of ideas about what it is to be human, what it is to have sort of consciousness. You heard an example this morning, which I've already had a lively discussion over lunch about. And so there's a lot of controversy over a lot of these issues, which I think AI is going to really kind of crystallize in the next few years, whether we can do hard or soft or whatever the type of AI you like there. I need to point at the thing. But I have to say, at the moment, we've got a bit of a problem because AI doesn't have the best rap. It's got a bit of a reputational issue, and socially, people are worried about AI. They don't know what it is, they don't know how it works, they don't know what the future might bring, and they watch a load of dystopian science fiction movies. So there's a lot of fear to do with AI. Social expectations are really important when it comes to how technology is going to be received. And basically, dystopian futures kind of pervade the social scene in terms of how people talk about AI and how people kind of conceptualize AI. Now, autonomous cars have kind of helped a little bit in that it's brought a much more positive spin to kind of what AI applications might be, but still we get, television shows about dystopian stuff with killer robots, Westworld, Person of Interest, Her, all of these sorts of shows, these movies, show quite negative sides of AI. So as an ethicist, you might think that I'm actually just here to tell you about all of the problems, but I'm an applied ethicist. That means I actually like to actually help solve some of these problems. And what I particularly like to do is actually look at the practical implications of some of the kind of more philosophical, theoretical stuff behind it and help actual real people do the thing. So the general public, basically, at the moment, they have a significant issue with what it is that human decisions can be like if they're implemented by AI. And things like they're worried about outsourcing for machine learning algorithms. They're worried about things like all those credit approval, loan approval systems that they might be kind of discriminated against. They've seen the horror stories about bias in algorithms. And this is an interesting one because I went to the language processing talk a couple of sessions ago, and this is quite an interesting particular bias about sexist bias. But we have biased algorithms. At the moment, we're putting stuff out there that we still don't quite have the right tweaks. We don't have quite the right data sets, perhaps. We haven't quite got to the point where we're able to say that actually our algorithms, the way that we're actually presenting the stuff that we find, is neutral in some sort of way. So people are worried because they see stuff like this and they think, well, this will mean that when I go for a credit loan, because I'm of a certain social class, I'm not going to get that credit or whatever, right? We also have significant problems with training in that people Some developers are a little irresponsible when it comes to actually putting things out in the wild. And what works nicely in kind of a lab session, or maybe with some of your students at your university, may not work so well in real life. And so basically, we get sort of, at the moment, we've still got irresponsible use of publicly accessible data. We've got uncontrolled input for learning. And this actually is one of the nicer things that Taybot said. Yeah. People are worried about delegation of human decisions to robots, basically. And I say robot in that kind of general sense. And they're worried about becoming unemployed. And yes, as we've probably all know, AI is not going to turn all the jobs over tomorrow. It's not going to, we're going to be changing the types of jobs that we do, perhaps. But certainly there's a lot of people who are in kind of perhaps lower skilled areas that can see their jobs being quite kind of a bit automatic, I suppose. They can see the potential for automation of those jobs. And that makes people kind of scared as well. We also have kind of black boxes. People don't understand how AI works. And yep, okay, so there's an education issue here, right? And perhaps what we should all do as responsible AI people that know how AI works is go out and actually tell people how it all works. Yeah, that's definitely one of the things we should do. But also, this is basically, we need to be able to explain what actually happens. And in some of these systems, we don't actually know what's inside the black box. We don't necessarily know how the decisions are being made by the machine in the box. So even if your idea is just kind of a proof of concept, though, it may not necessarily be the best idea either. So this, for example, was kind of a proof of concept to show how AI could be used kind of in bad ways, but actually it got taken as being hey, let's try to identify people's sexuality. So it was really poorly received in the press, even though as an academic kind of exercise, it was okay. So even these sorts of simpler kind of proof of concepts, if you don't contextualize it right for society, people kind of take it the wrong way. And also then people could actually pick it up and use it themselves for the wrong reasons. So you could see something like this being really popular in Trump's America, for example. If anyone here was at the talk just beforehand from our legal expert, he talked about how basically the law takes ages to catch up and how sectors are now starting to self-regulate quite significantly, particularly like the autonomous car industry are really eager to self-regulate because of the fact that they don't want the big hammer of the law or the European Union regulatory bodies to come stepping on them. So Jim Moore called this gap between the development of technology and the law and policy and governance kind of catching up. He called that the policy vacuum. And basically, it's sort of the idea being really that it just takes a while for regulation to kind of catch up. And society people generally feel comfortable if they know that there's some sort of law or regulation in place that will protect them, okay? So I've talked a lot about how people think about AI. This is probably not something that's new to you, but under all of this is the fact that us as humans, we look for humanity in things. And we've been looking for humanity in things like we anthropomorphize cats, we talk to inanimate objects. We look for people in things all the time. And we also look at machines as things that do things for us, right? But now, actually, with AI, we're looking to machines to actually decide what to do for us. And that's quite a big conceptual leap for a lot of people. Not just to decide what to do, but when to do it, and whether it's kind of a good idea in the first place. And a lot of these machines can have a profound impact on people's lives. So, for example, yes, when you're looking at large groups, large numbers of statistics, and you're trying to work out whether to give a loan to somebody, they're just another number in the crunch. But to that person, they're a real person, and they really need that loan. And maybe there has been some issue with that. And so it's very easy to kind of get lost in the numbers and forget sometimes that there are real people at the end. Children also are particularly vulnerable in these situations. So this was an experiment that was done with children talking to Alexa, Google Home, Cosmo, and the Julie chatbot, and they talked to it as if it were an actual person. So they asked it things about itself, like how old it was, how old they were. They looked for human characteristics. So, for example, this child was talking about how Cosmo can move his eyes like a person, unlike Alexa, which is just a cylinder. We look for, particularly children, look for ourselves in other things. And they played with them as well, like they would really, really stupid humans. And actually, at one point, one little girl who was about 3 or 4 said that, oh, no, this Alexa doesn't know the answer to that question. You should go ask the other Alexa, right? So basically, you get frustrated when your computer perhaps doesn't quite, when your Siri doesn't quite understand what you said. Children get frustrated, but then they go to the other Alexa. So we need to build the trust back in AI, and this is actually something else that Andrew previously talked about, is that there's a significant trust issue between what society expects of AI and what actually is kind of being provided. We need to get the public back on side and to make AI much more socially acceptable. So the moment it's kind of accepted that you put your data into something and probably someone somewhere will crunch some numbers and give you something back. People kind of understand some of the basics of how like Siri and that sort of thing works. But those are kind of things that are, well, you can't really buy a smartphone without some sort of digital assistant these days. It's kind of being forced upon people. And that's when you start to get people kind of pushing back. It may work, things like CCTV is actually a really good example, right? So when CCTV first came out, it was really just pushed on people. There was a lot of kind of outcry about it, and people were very frustrated about it and upset and felt like their privacy was being invaded. And then it kind of settled down after a while once the regulation and all that kind of caught up, right? So we'll probably see a similar sort of thing for AI, but unlike CCTV, CCTV is kind of passive and up there and kind of, away from my daily life, really, if I'm not doing bad things, right? And can kind of be helpful in some situations, but AI's got a lot more potential to have negative impacts on people as well. So your AI might make the world a better place, but we're not purely rational creatures, unfortunately. We have thoughts and opinions and feelings, and they all come back to how, our background, our education, where we were brought up, who our friends were, who our parents are, all this sort of thing. And we regularly reject stuff that's based purely on fear or doubt or uncertainty. Society, we shape the technology that we want to use, but then this technology also shapes us in a way. So if you look at the impact the internet's had on society, it's a very significant impact. And if you look at things like genetic modification of food, for example, there's the potential there for quite a significant impact for a lot of people, for example, in the developing countries where you could grow rice that had a much bigger yield, et cetera, et cetera. But there was significant pushback, particularly in Europe, against genetic modification of food. And that was because people just didn't really understand it and didn't see the benefit to them. And also there was a lot of kind of lobby groups who was saying bad things about it, a bit like the dystopian future sci-fi movies that we get at the moment for AI. Now, basically, that ended up as a bit of a disaster for science and scientists, because although the science is pretty good, they weren't very good at communicating it. And this is one of the things I'm going to get to in a bit, is about basically communication isn't just about education. It's not just about saying, oh, we're the people that know the thing. These people don't know the thing. We need to tell them what the thing is, and then they'll be okay with it. It doesn't work like that, and genetic modification stuff shows that that didn't work. So we have a responsibility as part of that to actually develop our technology in a way that actually takes the society's considerations into consideration. We can't just take it for granted that the society will accept our technology, and we can't take it for granted that the stuff that we build, perhaps as fundamental developers of low-level stuff, will actually be used for good things by the people that we sell it to either. Like we were talking before, it's all about training, and you've got to make what you kind of get in determines what you get out, etc., etc. And we can't even guarantee that the sort of thing that we would want our technology to be used for is going to be used, that it's going to be used in that way. Please don't fall for the myth that technology is neutral. Technology is not neutral. Everything that you develop brings with it all of the assumptions, all of the biases, all of your background, and you put that into your technology, whether it's a group or whatever. I mean, it could be a Western-focused privacy app. It could be a young, white, male-developed thing that doesn't take into account women using it, things like that. So there's a whole bunch of loads and loads of research and stuff that shows that technology isn't neutral. Have a read of Langdon Winner's book, Do Artifacts Have Politics, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But it's a myth. Technology is not neutral. Your assumptions about how the technology will be used, whether it will be acceptable to society, or if it's accessible, if it caters to certain cultures, all of these things are built into the technologies that you develop. And AI is no exception. So how can we actually make sure that what we're developing is actually useful, acceptable, and appropriate for society, and actually how do we make sure that it's built with society in mind for the social good? So the research that my group and I do a lot on is called Responsible Research and Innovation, and it's basically we're getting some money from the European Commission, and we're doing a bunch of funded projects, and I've been doing this now for about 10 years, where we're looking at governance of technology, particularly emerging technologies, and responsible research and innovations kind of come out of that sphere. It's basically a framework that allows developers, particularly tech developers, but we're using it in nanotech, biotech, all sorts of other places as well now, even the humanities. It's being used across a whole bunch of different disciplines, and it's appropriate not just for research groups, but also for industry, because I'm working on stuff to do with industry. So what it says is that you need to anticipate what the potential impact of your technology might be. And then the anticipation aspect is really about not what you think is likely to happen, but what might happen. So not only should you look at use cases, not only should you look at, like, I don't know, if you do any forecasting or something like that, but you should look at misuse cases. You should look at the potential bad things that might happen. And some of the questions that you might want to ask yourself as a developer is, should you actually even do this to start with? Is this actually really something that's for the social good? Is this something that can be used for the public good? Is the way that you're going to go about it actually acceptable? Is it something that perhaps if you, use a bunch of test data that people haven't said it's okay to use, should you really be doing that? Perhaps you should go get some new data or something like that. Will the product itself be socially desirable? Actually, what are the outcomes likely to be? And are those likely to have a positive impact on society? And does society actually want the thing, right? How sustainable is the outcome? This is kind of to do with environmental stuff, so is it actually sustainable? What happens when you decide your company gets sold to another company, like you get acquired or something like that? What will happen to the people that depend on the technology that you've developed? And have you involved the right stakeholders? So you need to identify who are the stakeholders. And they're not just your clients, they are anybody who are potentially impacted by the creation or the deployment of your technology. So if you're doing stuff in healthcare, it's not just going to be the hospitals or the doctors that you're working with, it's going to be the patients, it's going to be the patients' families, it's going to be your team, it's going to be your bosses, it's going to be the people, venture capitalists, whoever it is, anyone that actually has an interest in the outcomes of what you're developing. And then you have to kind of think about the concerns that they would raise and balance them off each other. And that brings us to the reflection aspect. So if you reflect on, this is basically about reflecting on how you then deal with the anticipated futures, the anticipated things that you've identified. Think about, look, is it actually something that's likely to be controversial? If it's going to be controversial, maybe there's some things you can do to actually help it not be so controversial. Think about how do you actually ensure that you get the feedback or the results of this process actually built back into the development of your system or your product? Are you sure that these are all the consequences? It might be worthwhile getting some other perspectives in to see what other people think about what the outcomes or impacts of your technology might be. Can it be used or misused? How might it be used or misused? What don't you know, or what don't you want to think about? In fact, that's usually the one. How could it be potentially, like, what are the things that you really just don't want to think about that could be a potential use or consequence of your thing? Who might be affected? This is a bit like the stakeholder thing. Can it be done differently? So really, do you need to do it the way that you're thinking? Is there possibly another way that you could go about it? Then the idea is that you need to engage. Now, this is the bit that people tend to get a bit funny about, because they think, oh my gosh, that means I have to go and talk to every random Joe in the street and ask them if they think my algorithm for determining correlations between X and Y is a good idea. No, it's about actually just dealing with, like, you could deal with stakeholder groups. So, for example, if you're working in healthcare, it's useful to work with patient organizations. If you're working with, people, I don't know, let's say credit companies or something like that, it's worthwhile talking to some user groups for people who might be affected by the sorts of things that you're doing with this company. Basically, the idea is that you should be bringing in the people into the development process to actually help out with the understanding of how it's going to impact them, and then also help you with brainstorming on how you can make it better. This is all about instilling public trust in what it is that you're doing. And the trust actually comes from some of the co-creation efforts. And we've done a lot of work with companies, particularly in health IT, and they basically, they always bring patients and things in, the people who are going to be affected by their stuff into the development process, and it helps them stave off like so many problems from the very, very beginning. And it's really, really beneficial for them. So I think there's a lot that can be learned from that. We talk about who else might be affected, is the research agenda acceptable, and what are the viewpoints of a diverse group of stakeholders. Yes, that's the other point, is that there needs to be some diversity. So if you're going to be rolling out a piece of something that's going to be accessible to all around the world, you should get some people that aren't from your country to have a look at it and see what they think as well. Finally, once you've done all these kind of setup processes and you've developed your thing, you need to actually do then actually need to make sure that you develop it in the way that you set yourself out to do so. So basically make sure that you ensure that the outcome that you wanted to get, you get that outcome. And hopefully if you've done all the other things like anticipated and engaged and reflected, you should be much easier to do that. You need to think about basically, is there anything that you can do along the way? So maybe education, for example, that can improve the social desirability of what it is that you're creating. And then also, for you as a company, perhaps, or for your clients, or for whoever it is that might be using it, what training, infrastructure, or processes and policies are needed to actually ensure that what you're developing is socially acceptable. So, one of my other hats that I wear is I'm on the steering committee for the ACM's Code of Ethics refresh. So we're rewriting the ACM's Code of Ethics at the moment. And if you're an ACM member, you've probably seen some communication about that in the CACM and other things. But we're doing a lot of work that aims to integrate potential issues with AI into the Code of Ethics. And there is another public, and not just for ACM members, but anyone interested in actually what a Code of Ethics for general computing professionals should look like. There's another round of public consultation starting in December, so I'd recommend having a look at that website if you're interested. But we are integrating now, because the code was written in 1992. It hasn't been updated till now. A few things have changed since 1992. And basically, we're trying to future-proof it a bit. So you won't see AI listed specifically, because we don't talk about any specific technologies. But what we try to do is bring the conceptual aspects in. So basically, it's got to do with things like responsibility. And with the legal expert just before was talking about legal responsibility. We want to talk about moral responsibility and ethical responsibility for what it is that you're creating. And basically, where he said, yes, the legal responsibility at the moment is with you, the creator. In the future, it may not be. Most of the ethicists that we've been discussing throughout this process with the ACM have said that it should always remain your moral responsibility. And basically, if you don't have a way to do an audit trail of what your algorithms are doing, then you shouldn't be making the thing, okay? You will have responsibility, moral responsibility, even if it's... So basically, whatever you're creating, it's got to come back to a human at some point, and whoever that human is, they're the person who's responsible. The US ACM and the EU ACM have specific statements about algorithmic transparency and accountability. So they say kind of the same sort of thing, pretty much. They talk about the fact that awareness, so it's your responsibility to raise awareness of what AI does from a positive perspective as well. They want to build positive perspectives. Access and redress, that's to do with kind of accessibility and basically what happens if things go wrong. Accountability is also kind of their explanation is you're supposed to be able to explain how your algorithm works. So these are experts on AI, so I didn't write these bits. Data provenance, that's probably self-explanatory. Auditability, validation, and testing, also probably fairly self-explanatory. So that's a really useful set of suggestions on some of the practical ways that you can particularly deal with the reflection capacity that I was just talking about. IEEE's released a couple of documents, one being an ethically aligned design document where they talk specifically about AI and machine learning, and the IEEE P7003 standard on algorithmic bias considerations. If you're doing anything with regard to that, that's a standard that they've put out as well, which I have absolutely nothing to do with, so I don't know if that's any good or not. Yeah, so doing all this stuff sounds like it's going to cost some, it's going to, bring on some costs, right? Because mostly what you want to do when you're a company is you want to get your MVP, and then you want to deal with all of these issues kind of after that, right? You've got your kind of technical, and you want to get your actual algorithm working. But actually, if you're a responsible developer, you should be thinking about this stuff from the beginning. And even if you're not going to integrate stuff right at the beginning, you need to have a plan for how you're going to do it, okay? It needs structured thought. It needs some processing time. It needs some policy within your company, or if you're a sole developer, then write one for yourself, I guess. It can take some time. Yes, if you go out and you talk to a bunch of groups of people, you bring them in for focus groups or a workshop or whatever, it's going to take some time and probably some money. And there needs to be some mechanisms for seeking these structured stakeholder feedback stuff. So that can be quite time and cost consuming as well. But if these are developed by you, then they're going to be actually kind of useful for you rather than if they're kind of imposed upon you, right? So if you actually kind of, go out and start doing this yourself, you're probably going to get much more out of it than if you kind of do it as a grudge thing later on. And I'm going to assume that the people in this room are generally interested in this sort of thing anyway. So hopefully this is good. However, benefits, there are lots of those. First thing you'll avoid, hopefully, a train crash. And really, a lot of it is about strengthening public trust, right? Because you want people to actually buy your stuff, and you want them to trust that it's actually not going to take over the world and kill everybody. Yeah, and you want to, there's an increase in accountability for the stuff that you develop as well, which is really good. It decreases some of the unintended consequences, because if you get people around the table discussing what it is that you want to do, they're probably going to think of the things that are going to be problematic, right? So, I mean, bias and algorithms, some of the bias and algorithm stuff would probably have been helped if some of the groups that were disadvantaged or discriminated against had been actually involved in some sort of testing aspect of that, right? So it's not rocket science. This is not like something hugely new. You can ensure social acceptance and acceptability of your innovation. This basically means you won't get horrible things said about you on Twitter, which is really nice. You'll ensure adherence to regulation, hopefully, when it comes out, because it will at some point. So if you get off, to a good start and you start doing this stuff voluntarily yourself, when the regulation stuff comes in, you'll be like, yeah, no problem, we've all got that sorted. And where there is regulation, you go above and beyond, because now we're seeing a lot of people are interested in buying into ethical companies, and companies actually care about this sort of stuff. And you'll probably find you can actually command a higher price, perhaps, than if you weren't. Also, it enhances the professional reputation of your company and also of the sector, right? You want not just your company to be looked at as a good thing, but generally AI as a good thing. And we want to see lots of positive science fiction utopian movies perhaps coming out about AI. And of course, it's not going to be a short-term gain in terms of profitability because there's a lot of costs involved in setting this stuff up. But if you set it up and you set it up properly and you set it up well, you'll add value as you go down the line because people will trust you and they'll be more likely to invest in you. And actually, I just had a chat over coffee with a venture capitalist group that was really interested in funding ethical companies that want to do good stuff and do it properly. So that's kind of good. So I was really happy about that. So here's a couple of websites on responsible research and innovation, which is that framework that I talked about. So the big one is Orbit, which is a UK EPSRC-funded research project that's basically a tender that we won from the EPSRC to set up a hub for responsible innovation, initially in research areas. That kind of covers a lot of you guys, though, because like AI is still, I would still say it's still in the research side of things. But we're moving also into industry, because I'm on a couple of European projects at the moment that have, one's just finished and another one's about halfway through now on research and innovation, responsible research and innovation in industry. The RRI Tools project is actually really good. It's like a database of some things that you can do to do things like stakeholder participation, co-creation. So if you saw any of those things, you thought, oh, how do I actually talk to stakeholders? What would I actually do with them when I got them in the room? That website, rritools.eu, is a really good source of some tools and strategies to actually work with people. There's also the New Horizon is a new project by the Commission, which is a big €6 million project. And they've got a series of social labs that are happening in the next coming couple of years, because it's a long project too, it's a 4-year project. They've got about certainly got a couple in the area of technology and society, and I'd recommend if you see those advertised that you go have a look, because they want people from industry to actually help. And this all goes into how the European Commission, Brexit, blah, 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 but if we stay in Europe, maybe, basically the outcomes of this project will then guide European policy on these technologies. So it's best to get involved in these sorts of things when you can. There's also a project, a UK project called the Unbiased Project, which is an Oxford University project, I think. Yeah, Marina Drotka's doing that. And it's about algorithm bias, and how do we unbias algorithm stuff. So I recommend having a look at that as well. Some take-home messages in case you've just woken up, because I know it's the last session of the day and you're all very tired like me. You're doing some really amazing things, and what I didn't want to come in and sort of say, oh, you're all irresponsible, horrible people and doing terrible things, because I know that you're not. Because I know that you're actually generally pretty good people and you want to do good stuff, and if you're here, you probably want even more to do good stuff. And most of the time, a lot of companies do all the right things. They just don't necessarily proceduralize it or make it kind of formal. And really, this sort of structure that I've just given you today is a kind of formal way, a more formalized way of kind of thinking through some of these issues. We can build better trust in AI, definitely. I think AI's got a lot of really good future potential from an ethics perspective, as well as everything else. And so, but we need to make sure that the public's on the side of it as well, so it doesn't become like another GMO food debacle. Without trust, there's no social acceptance, no matter how good the tech is. So you can build the best tech in the world, but if you don't have the public on your side, you're going to run into problems. Responsible AI development requires you to anticipate potential impacts, reflect on the processes and ethical issues, engage with stakeholders, and actually act ethically and responsibly, do the thing properly, so that society likes you. And that's me. Thank you.